I will never forget the sound of the door slamming into my back. It was dry, brutal, as if with that single slam my whole life had been thrown outside the home I had built with my own hands. I fell to the ground on the freezing pavement while my son-in-law, eyes full of hate, shouted at me, "You're going to die on the street, you filthy old man. Don't you set foot here again." My daughter stood behind him trembling, not with fear, but with shame of me. When I tried to speak, when I tried to tell her I had only come to fetch my medicine, she cut me off with a voice I will never forget. "Did you hear my husband? Dad, go, we don't want you here." And then he, that man who once called me dear father-in-law, took my photos, my shirts, the memories of my late wife, and tossed them to the ground. With a cruel smile, he stomped them one by one. "That's to remind you who runs things here," he said before landing a kick that knocked the air out of me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind, the kind that burrows deep inside the chest. I stayed on the ground, staring at the pieces of my life scattered along the curb, unable to understand how I had reached that point. I had given them everything, everything. And still, there I lay like an old rag, while my daughter drew the curtains, so she wouldn't have to see me. I forced myself up, knees trembling, clutching a suitcase that weighed nothing anymore because there was nearly nothing left inside. I walked without looking back. Night fell and rain began to fall too, as if the sky wanted to keep me company in my misfortune. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. This helps me know you're with me and enjoy what I do with my heart. Now let's continue. I walked as far as my body would allow. The city looked enormous, crueler than ever. No one glanced at the old man, shuffling forward, drenched, dignity in shreds. I thought about taking shelter at the station, but the guard threw me out. I ended up on a park bench under a flickering street lamp, as if it too were tired of living. There, with the distant hum of cars and the smell of wet earth, my mind filled with memories. I saw the face of my wife Lena, smiling the way she did when we moved into that house for the first time. I remembered how we painted the walls together, how we planted a tree in the backyard the same day our daughter was born. That tree must be more than 30 years old now. And I was its old, twisted shadow. I couldn't understand it. My daughter, my only daughter, the same girl I carried on my shoulders when she learned to walk, the one who got sick and made me sleep beside her bed, the one I worked myself sick for just to pay her college. When did she become someone capable of casting me out without a grain of mercy? The answer hurt to admit. The moment she met her husband, that arrogant man who walked into my life with fake smiles and empty promises. At first he seemed polite, decent, hard-working, but soon I noticed his condescending tone, his gestures of superiority, the way he looked at her as if she were his trophy. I endured him for my daughter because I believed he'd mature in time, but I was wrong. What matured was his cruelty. That night the cold seeped into my bones. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I could only turn over a phrase that kept repeating itself. They took everything from you, but they can't take who you are. And though I felt defeated, a small spark began to burn inside me. It wasn't rage, it was deeper, a promise. I promised I wouldn't die out there on the street. I promised that someday, somehow, they would understand what they had done. I wasn't seeking vengeance, not yet. I sought something that hurt more, the mirror, so that one day they'd see themselves and feel shame, that they'd understand the old man they threw out was the same one who gave them shelter, food, and a name. Dawn found me awake, clothes damp and body aching. A little boy passing with his mother looked at me with pity. She pulled him away quickly, as if I were a dangerous shadow. And at that moment, watching them go, I decided I wouldn't stay like this. I wouldn't be another elder abandoned by his own. I would stand up even if it was the last thing I did. I stood. My legs shook, but I took the first step, and though the icy wind lashed my face, something in me lit up. I knew that one day I would return to that house, but not as the defeated man who left that night, rather as the one who comes back to teach the greatest lesson of all, that love betrayed becomes strength, and when dignity rises again, it does not forgive oblivion. Sleeping on the street is not just cold or hunger. It's a silent war with the mind. The nights never end. The hours stretch as if time itself wanted to torture you. You hear footsteps, cars, murmurs. Everything feels far away, as if the world keeps turning while you're suspended in a forgotten corner. That first week was hell. I learned that loneliness has a sound. The wind moving through the trees, the drops tapping the roof of a bus stop, the echo of a voice no longer there. I spent my days on the same park bench near a fountain where children tossed coins and made wishes. I watched them and thought that once I had been one of them, believing that closing my eyes and dreaming was enough to make everything come true. Now I understood that life doesn't grant wishes, it charges interest. Hunger became my worst enemy. It wasn't only physical, it was a sensation of total emptiness. I ate what I could. Heels of bread, a cold coffee that sometimes a stranger left on the bench for me. The body learns to survive, but the soul does not. Every time the sun went down, the image of my home returned. The chair by the window, my daughter serving me tea on winter afternoons. And although that image hurt, it was the only thing that kept my heart beating. One especially cold night, when the wind seemed to pass through bone, I caught myself speaking alone. I spoke with Lena, my wife. "If you could see me, love," I whispered. "If you could see me now, sitting on this bench like a beggar." I imagined her voice answering with tenderness. "Get up, Marvin. Don't give them the power to see you fall." I closed my eyes and I could smell her, feel her presence as if she sat beside me. That feeling, for an instant, returned to me the strength I had lost. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you are enjoying this story. This helps me see that you're with me and enjoy what I write with my heart. Now let's continue. The following days were a parade of indifferent faces. I learned to recognize the look of those who see you, yet pretend not to. In this society, old folks without shelter are ghosts. We exist, but nobody wants to remember it. However, one afternoon something changed. I was gathering scraps behind a coffee shop when I heard a voice behind me. "Marvin, is that you?" I turned and saw a tall man with gray hair and an elegant suit. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. It was Anthony Carter, an old friend from my youth, with whom I had worked construction more than 30 years ago. His expression froze when he saw me. "My God, what happened to you?" he asked, shocked and saddened. I didn't know what to say. I lowered my head in shame. "Life, Anthony. Life ran me over." He took my arm without another word and led me to his car. I had no strength to resist. During the drive, he didn't speak and neither did I, but I could feel his sideways glances, pity mixed with respect, as if trying to understand how a man who had once been strong and dignified had ended up on the street. When we reached his home, he sat me at a table and served a hot plate. I don't remember the last time I tasted real food. As I ate, my hands trembled so much I had to hold the fork with both. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to," he said, "but I want you to know I won't leave you like this." I looked into his eyes. In them I saw something I thought lost: humanity. That night I slept in a clean bed with warm sheets and the kind silence of a home. I didn't sleep deeply. The body rests, but the mind stays alert. Even so, I thanked every second of that truce. The next morning, Anthony took me for a walk through the garden. He told me about his life, how he'd become a lawyer, about his late wife, about his kids who lived far away. At one point he stopped and said, "Don't ask me why, but I feel like fate brought you to me for a reason." I looked at him without fully understanding. "What reason could there be, Anthony?" "Maybe to give you a second chance," he answered with a faint smile, "and also to settle accounts with the past." That sentence bounced around in my head the rest of the day. A second chance at my age, after so much pain. Still, something inside me, a tiny spark, lit again. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe life still had one more page with my name on it. That night, before sleeping, I asked God that if I stood up again, it wouldn't be to destroy, but to do justice, not to seek revenge, but to reclaim my name, my dignity, my place in the world. With that thought, I fell asleep with a calm heart for the first time in a long while. I woke early, and for the first time in weeks I didn't feel my body numb or the weight of hunger pressing on my chest. Sunlight entered through the window and rested on my hands. The same cracked hands that once built a home brick by brick and now lay on a clean blanket. I stared at them for a long time, thinking about all they had done, how they had raised a family, a home, a future, and how, in a single instant, all of it had been lost. Anthony entered quietly with a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, old friend," he said in that deep but gentle voice. "You look better today." I took the cup carefully. I don't know if better, but at least different. He smiled and sat across from me. Different is a good start. We stayed a while in silence, looking out the window. Outside, the garden filled with light, and birdsong felt like a small miracle. After so much time among dirt, rain, and contempt, that simple sunrise tasted like redemption. When I finished the coffee, Anthony watched me with a new seriousness. "Marvin, I need you to tell me everything. No holding back. What happened to you? How you ended up on the street?" I hesitated. Putting humiliation into words was hard, but his gaze held no judgment, only understanding. So, in a low voice, I told him everything. From the day my son-in-law first crossed my door to the night he threw me out like a dog. As I spoke, the wounds opened again. I recounted the details, my daughter's tone, the sound of photos breaking, the final slam. Anthony didn't interrupt. He only listened, brow furrowed and eyes burning with indignation. When I finished, I sat in exhausted silence. He stood and paced a few steps. Then he turned to me. "Marvin, do you know that legally the house is still yours?" I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I checked some records this morning," he said. "I remembered you told me years ago you bought it before your daughter got married. And although you made a verbal cession, no transfer was ever registered. In the eyes of the law, it's still in your name." I felt the air stop. "You mean?" I started, and he cut in gently. "I mean that bastard not only humiliated you, he's been living under a roof that belongs to you." I couldn't speak. I stared into space. Something that had slept in my soul stirred awake. "Anthony," I said quietly, "I don't want to become a bitter man, but I don't want to die with this weight on me either." He came close and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then don't die, Marvin. Rise. Seek justice. Not for pride, but for dignity." His words struck like thunder. I mulled them all day while he made calls and reviewed papers. I watched him move with cool, precise elegance. His office was lined with law books, diplomas, old photographs. He looked like a man who had won all his battles, and yet his face carried something I knew well, the sadness of one who also lost what he loved. When he returned to the living room, he handed me an envelope. "Everything we need to begin is here," he said. "But before we act, I want you to be sure. This isn't a simple procedure. It's the start of something bigger." I opened it carefully. Inside were deed copies, legal documents, and a letter signed by a notary. Everything perfectly in order. "How did you do all this so fast?" I asked, surprised. "Let's just say time taught me how to move quietly," he replied with a half-smile. "But before we go on, there's something I need to know. Do you want this for justice or for revenge?" I held his gaze. It took a few seconds to answer. "For justice," I said at last, "because I want my daughter to understand what she did. I want her to see the price of her silence." Anthony nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it your way. No shouting, no violence, no rancor. We'll make them fall with the truth." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the room with the envelope in my hand. I read the documents again and again, trying to grasp how fate, which had crushed me without mercy, was now lending me a hand. I thought of my wife. If Lena were alive, she'd have smiled at this, not for the money or the house, but because she always believed justice, sooner or later, arrives to those who act with a clean heart. Before bed, I opened the window. Outside, the sky was strewn with stars, and for the first time in months, I felt I wasn't alone. The wind brought a phrase I heard in my mind. "They won't give back what you lost, Marvin. They'll give back your chance to be who you were." I closed my eyes and smiled, because maybe, just maybe, destiny was giving me something more valuable than a house. It was giving me the right to look at the world again without lowering my head. Feeling alive again was harder than I imagined. The body gets used to pain, but the soul takes longer to heal. The first days after speaking with Anthony, I spent in silence, as if each word he'd said had to settle inside me. The idea of reclaiming what was mine, of returning to that house not as a beggar, but as its rightful owner, gave me strength and fear. fear of facing my daughter again, fear of looking into the eyes of the one who'd forgotten me without trembling. Anthony helped in everything. He took me to a doctor, got me tests and treatment. I learned that despite it all, my heart was still steady. It's worn, but strong, the doctor said. That felt like the perfect metaphor for my life. Anthony also got me new clothes and a temporary job at one of his construction firms. The first time I held a tool after so many years, my hands shook. Not from weakness, but emotion. It was like finding a part of myself I thought I'd lost. On the job, I watched the young men beside me. They complained about the heat, the fatigue, the long shifts. I watched in silence, thinking what I'd give to be 20 years younger with a chance to start over. I didn't judge them. I saw myself in them, remembering the man I had been, strong, determined, full of dreams. Each day when the shift ended, I returned to the small room Anthony had prepared. It was simple, but it had what mattered most, peace. I'd switch on an old lamp, pour a cup of tea, and write in a notebook. There I began to set down my thoughts, my memories, and little by little my plans. Not plans for revenge, but for life. One night, while I wrote, Anthony came in without knocking. "Still awake, huh?" he said, half stern, half fatherly. "Yeah, sleep is hard to catch. I suppose when hope returns, it chases sleep away." He chuckled and sat across from me. "I've been thinking, Marvin. We're ready to act legally, but I want you prepared. This is going to stir things up. Your daughter will cry, she'll scream, and your son-in-law, well, he'll lash out like a cornered wolf." I looked at him, calm but resolved. "Anthony, I don't want to destroy them. I want them to understand what they did. That life isn't built by humiliating the one who loved you." He nodded, as if he understood more than he said. "Then we'll do this with elegance. No scenes, no scandals, only truth." I kept turning that word over. Truth. So many times I had kept quiet out of love. So many times I chose silence to avoid conflict. But I understood that silence is also a way to die. Sometimes you have to speak, even if it hurts, even if your voice shakes. That night I dreamed of Lena. We were in the garden of the house, the one she tended with so much love. Her hands were full of soil. When she saw me, she smiled. "You've returned to your roots," she said. "The earth doesn't forget who planted it." I woke with tears in my eyes, and with a peace I hadn't felt in years. It was as if she were telling me that the path I'd chosen was the right one. Weeks passed, and my body began to respond. I walked taller, breathed without pain, and even my face changed. One day I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The defeated man had vanished. In his place stood someone with fire in his eyes and temperance in his voice. One afternoon, while we were drinking coffee, Anthony said, "I've been checking something else. Your son-in-law, besides taking your house, has been using your assets as collateral for loans he can't repay. If we wanted, we could leave him ruined." I looked at him and felt a pang in my chest, not of guilt but of compassion. "No, Anthony, I don't want to see him ruined. I want him to face himself. I want him to look in the mirror and see what he really is. Money can be recovered, but shame marks a man for life." Anthony studied me in silence, nodding slowly. "You're more noble than I thought, Marvin." "No, my friend. I've just learned that hate destroys the one who carries it more than the one who receives it." From that day, everything began to change. Anthony moved his influence quietly. He spoke with a judge, prepared documents, reopened registries, and while he handled the legal world, I handled the emotional one, strengthening my spirit, preparing myself to look my daughter in the eye without hatred. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw an elderly woman feeding pigeons. I sat beside her, and she smiled. "You have the look of someone starting over," she said. "Maybe," I answered. "Sometimes life uproots us only to plant us better." She nodded, as if she had waited her whole life to hear that. When I returned home that night, I found Anthony in the dining room with a folder open on the table. He looked at me with that expression that mixed satisfaction and respect. "It's all ready, Marvin. Only your signature is missing." I took a deep breath and held the pen, feeling the weight of years, the weight of my story. And as I signed, I knew that something inside me was closing. The humiliated old man died there in that ink. In his place was born the man who had found his voice again. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or fury. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as patience, walking slowly but surely. Anthony used to tell me that whenever I grew impatient for results, "Time is a wiser judge than we are, Marvin." He'd repeat, "You just have to give it the right evidence." And that's what we did. Gave time everything it needed to play in our favor. Every day Anthony explained a little more about what we were building. It wasn't just a legal case. It was a perfectly woven web of documents, statements, and calculated silences. We weren't going to burst into their house or confront them directly. No, we were going to knock on the doors of their conscience and the courts. During those weeks, I became his shadow. I followed him to the office, watched how he drafted papers, how he spoke with calm authority. Every movement was part of an invisible strategy. I didn't know much about law, but I did know about construction. And in a way, this was the same, building something solid, brick by brick, until no lie could knock it down. One morning, Anthony handed me an envelope full of papers. "Here are the certified copies of your house's deeds, notarized. No transfer was ever recorded to your daughter or your son-in-law. You're still the absolute owner." I took the envelope with trembling hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. So, all they did, all their arrogance, all their contempt, was on ground that still belonged to me. Anthony smiled faintly. "That's right. They believed themselves kings of the world and don't even know they're living under your roof." That phrase struck me like lightning. I imagined their house, their laughter, their dinners with friends. All of it built on a mistake, one they'd soon pay dearly for. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you're enjoying this story. This helps me know you're with me and that you enjoy what I write with my heart. Now let's continue. Anthony began to gather evidence of how my son-in-law had used my assets as collateral for illegal loans. He did everything carelessly, with the arrogance of someone who believes impunity lasts forever. "He messed with the wrong man," said Anthony as he reviewed a document. "Sometimes justice arrives in the form of an old man, but it arrives all the same." I listened silently, recalling every word, every insult, every gesture of disdain, not with hate, but with a clean, conscious memory. It was important not to let resentment consume me. I wanted my victory to be calm, elegant, without the stain of bitterness. One afternoon, Anthony took me to a discreet restaurant downtown. There, a notary and a young man were waiting. "Marvin, this is Marcus," said Anthony. "He'll investigate your son-in-law's financial movements, quietly." The young man shook my hand firmly. "I promise your story won't be silenced," he said. "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they wear scars." That phrase moved me more than I expected. I thanked him with a handshake and realized I was no longer alone. There was an invisible network of people who wanted to help, not out of pity, but out of respect. The following days were a mixture of calm and tension. I knew something big was brewing, but I also knew I had to remain steady. I spent my afternoons walking through the park or sitting by the harbor. Sometimes I took my notebook with me and wrote down scattered thoughts about forgiveness, about time, about dignity. I remember one sunset in particular. I was sitting watching the waves when a little boy came up to me to sell flowers. "Who are they for?" he asked with innocence. I smiled. "For someone who's gone, but who taught me everything I know about love." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, and went on his way. I looked at the flowers in my hands. They were small, humble, but beautiful. At that moment I realized that although my life was filled with scars, there was still beauty in it. As the days passed, Anthony updated me with every development. "Your son-in-law is in trouble, Marvin. Soon, a judicial inspector will go to his house to review the property titles. He doesn't suspect anything yet, but his name is already showing up in the records." "And my daughter?" I asked quietly. "She has no idea. She lives in a bubble, believing her husband controls everything. When he falls, the whole lie will collapse." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced the hallway of Anthony's house, my heart swirling with emotions. I didn't want her to suffer, but I also knew pain is sometimes the only way to awaken. At dawn, I poured myself a cup of coffee and went out into the garden. The fresh air brushed my face. I thought of Lena, as always. Are you watching this, love? I whispered. I'm not seeking revenge, but justice for us, for everything we built. And the breeze seemed to answer. I didn't know if I was ready to see her again. Not my daughter, but her, the house, my house. The one I built with my hands and the sweat of my brow. The walls I raised brick by brick, each inch made to protect the ones I loved. Months had passed since that night they threw me out, but in my mind the echo of the door slammed still lived. Anthony told me it was important to see it again, not as a victim, but as a man. To close the cycle, he said, first you must face it. So I went, not with anger, but with calm. Wearing a borrowed suit, hair combed back, a folder in my hand to make me look like a serious client. I presented myself as a buyer interested in luxury properties in the area. Anthony arranged a visit, pretending to be my advisor. Neither of us used our real names. When the car stopped in front of the gate, a knot formed in my stomach. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The facade had a new coat of paint, Lena's flower pots were gone, and the old rose bush we planted on our 20th anniversary had vanished. In its place was an artificial garden, perfect, lifeless. Anthony gave me a subtle nod, asking for courage. I breathed deeply and rang the bell. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and there he was, my son-in-law, the same arrogant face, the same fake smile. His eyes studied me with feigned courtesy. He didn't recognize me. "Good morning," he said, adjusting his expensive watch. "How can I help you?" "Good morning," I replied, holding back the tremor in my voice. "We're interested in viewing the house. We heard it's listed among high-end properties." He smiled, self-satisfied. "Ah, yes, well, it's not officially on the market yet, but I'm always open to offers. Please come in." I stepped inside, and the air hit me like a living memory. I recognized every corner, every line in the ceiling, but nothing had the same soul. The paintings Lena made were gone. In their place hung framed photos of trips and dinners with strangers. The couch where my granddaughter used to nap was now white, spotless, as if never used. And the smell, no longer warm, no longer of coffee and flowers, now was perfume and emptiness. I walked slowly, letting my eyes drink in the details. Each step was a blow to my heart. I touched the railing of the staircase and felt the small mark where my daughter, as a child, had carved her initials with a kitchen knife. I bent down to see if it was still there. It wasn't. They'd sanded it away, as if they wanted to erase every trace of who we were. My son-in-law talked nonstop, bragging about the renovations. We tore down the old back wall, installed Italian marble in the kitchen. Everything's brand new now. The house has a whole new level of sophistication. I nodded, pretending interest, while inside I felt everything breaking apart. "Must have been expensive," I said. "Oh, quite," he replied with that air of superiority. "But money's not an issue when you know how to manage yourself." Anthony watched him calmly, studying him. He knew that every arrogant word the man spoke would be his undoing when the time came. We continued the tour and reached the backyard. Lena's tree was still there, tall and strong, its branches stretching toward the sky. They'd wrapped decorative lights around it, but its trunk remained the same. I touched the rough bark and felt a chill run through me. She's still here, I thought. My son-in-law noticed my silence. "Interested in the garden?" he asked. "Very much," I said, masking the emotion in my voice. "Old trees have stories money can't buy." He laughed. "Well, some of us prefer to leave old things behind. What matters is moving forward." I looked at him for just a moment, and in that instant, I understood he was already defeated without knowing it, because those who forget their roots always fall eventually. As we returned to the car, my daughter appeared at the entrance. My heart stopped. She hadn't changed much, but her expression had. She looked like someone living between luxury and sadness. She didn't recognize me right away. "Interested in buying?" she asked politely. "That's right," Anthony answered, keeping his tone formal. "Your husband just showed us the house. It's impressive." She smiled coldly. "Yes, he's worked very hard to achieve all this." That phrase cut through me like a knife. "He's worked very hard." I almost answered, almost told her the truth right there, but I held back. It wasn't time yet. Vengeance isn't served with shouting, it's served with silence. We said our polite goodbyes and got back in the car. Neither of us spoke during the drive. Only when the car stopped in front of Anthony's office did he break the silence. "You okay?" "No," I answered honestly. "But now I know exactly why I'm doing this." That night in my room, I lit a candle in front of Lena's photo. "They've changed everything, love," I whispered, "but they couldn't erase what matters most, what we were. And soon they'll understand that the house wasn't just walls. It was memory. It was respect." I blew out the candle. That night, I didn't sleep. The visit to the house had stirred something deep inside me. Seeing those empty walls, those rooms that once held laughter and warmth now turned cold and sterile. It felt like walking through the ruins of my own life. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake. The sky was pale gray, unpromising, but I knew something was about to change. I could feel time finally leaning in my favor. Anthony arrived early as always, immaculate in his dark suit, a thick folder under his arm, and a serious expression. "Today it begins, Marvin," he said without hesitation. "We have everything we need." "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "More than ever," he said, opening the folder on the table. Inside were the original deeds, notarized certifications, and banking records proving how my son-in-law had used my assets without my authorization. Every signature, every seal, every date in perfect order. "This is a castle of lies," Anthony said, tapping the paper softly, "and all it takes is one stone removed for it to collapse." I handled the documents carefully, as if holding something sacred. They were just papers, yes, but they weighed like years of my labor, my sacrifices, my life. "And now what?" I asked quietly. "We'll file the property restitution and fraud complaint," he said with surgical calm. "Once the judge signs, an officer will deliver the order to their door." I stayed silent, imagining their faces at that moment when they would hear the words, "This property does not belong to you." "Anthony," I said softly, "promise me there will be no scandal." "There will be justice," he replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. I spent the rest of the day in my room, unable to focus on anything else. The sound of Anthony's pen scratching in his office, the distant hum of the city, the steady tick of the clock. Everything felt like part of some inevitable preparation. I took out my notebook, the one where I had been writing since the day I decided to rise again, and began a letter. Not to the judge, not to Anthony, to her, my daughter. "Daughter," I began, my handwriting trembling. "If you ever read this, it might be too late to ask for forgiveness, or to understand what you did. I don't write from hatred, but from sadness. I never wanted your suffering, but you needed to learn what it feels like to lose what you thought eternal. When you were little, you said I was your hero, and I was, until I stopped being one in your eyes. I don't know when love turned into shame, when you began to see me as a burden. But know this, even the day you threw me out, my heart still loved you the same. Today, life will teach you what I couldn't. Not to punish you, but to remind you that dignity isn't inherited, it's learned." I laid the paper aside and stared at the half-finished page. I couldn't go on. A knot rose in my throat, a mix of love and pain without release. Anthony came in quietly. He saw the letter in my hands and understood without asking. "For her?" I nodded. "You still love her, don't you?" "A father never stops loving, Anthony. He just learns to love from afar." He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "Then keep it. Give it to her when all this is over. Sometimes truth needs silence to be heard." That night the wind rattled the windows. I couldn't sleep. I walked from one end of the room to the other, reliving every stage of my life, every sacrifice, every mistake. I thought of Lena, how she would have handled all this. "With your head high, Marvin," she'd have said, but without hate. I sat again, took up the letter, and wrote one final line at the bottom. "I'm not seeking revenge, daughter. I just want you to remember who I am. Because the man you threw out wasn't a burden. He was your father." I folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it inside the box where I kept the dried flowers from Lena's garden, the last link to our past. The next morning, Anthony arrived with his usual composure. The judge signed it. He said simply, "Tomorrow an officer will deliver the order." I stood motionless, feeling my whole body tense. It was the beginning of the end. Anthony looked at me with a mixture of respect and pride. "You don't need to go, Marvin. I can handle everything." But I shook my head. "No, Anthony. I'll be there. Not as someone claiming property, but as someone returning to what's his." He met my eyes and understood. "Then prepare yourself, my friend. Tomorrow, the man who was thrown out of his home will walk back through the front door." That night I slept little, but for the first time, I slept in peace, because I knew that when dawn came, history would turn around. Morning moved painfully slow. Every minute felt like a lifetime. I put on the only suit I had, the one Anthony had helped me tailor weeks ago. I pressed it carefully, combed my hair, and took a deep breath in front of the mirror. I wanted to look dignified, not for vanity, but because that day meant more than justice. It meant my return to the living. Anthony arrived right on time, elegant as always. He carried a black briefcase and an expression that mixed determination with respect. Behind him came a man in a dark suit, middle-aged, holding an official folder in his hand. His eyes were cold, professional. "The judicial officer. Ready?" Anthony asked, as if he needed to hear my voice to seal the moment. "Ready," I replied. The drive to the house was silent. I watched through the window of the same streets I'd walked months ago, the night I'd been cast out under the rain. But now everything was different. I was no longer that broken man dragging a half-empty suitcase. I was someone who had learned that pain can also be strength. When the car stopped in front of the gate, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it. There it was, my house, proud, beautiful, but soulless. Lena's tree stood tall in the yard, its branches open as if welcoming me home. The officer stepped out first, straightening his tie. Anthony followed with steady steps. I stayed a moment longer inside the car, looking at the facade. I touched the edge of the seat, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "Lena, I'm home." I got out slowly. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, as if time itself had stopped. The man in the dark suit knocked on the door 3 times. The sound echoed down the quiet street. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there she was, my daughter. She stood there, dressed elegantly, but her face was tired. At first, she didn't recognize me. Her eyes went from the officer to Anthony, and finally to me. Confusion flashed across her face, followed by a faint, trembling recognition. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. I didn't respond. It wasn't time yet. Behind her appeared her husband, the same man who had thrown me out. His expression tightened with irritation when he saw 3 strangers at his door. "What's this about?" he barked. The officer pulled out a document, his tone calm and official. "Mr. Miller, I bring you a judicial notification. This property has been identified as legally belonging to Mr. Marvin Hayes, who is present here." He laughed, a dry, nervous, disbelieving sound. "There must be some mistake," he said, forcing a smile. "This house is mine." Anthony stepped forward, his voice firm. "No mistake. This house belongs to the man you threw out months ago. The rightful owner never transferred his rights. Everything you've done since, the loans, the renovations, the purchases, are now under judicial review." Miller's face went pale. His false confidence drained away like water from a cracked cup. "This is a joke," he muttered. "It isn't," Anthony said sharply, "and I advise you not to resist. The order is already signed." My daughter stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad," she said, trembling, "what are you doing?" I took one step toward her. "I'm not doing anything, sweetheart. I'm just taking back what I should never have lost, my name." The officer entered first, followed by Anthony. I lingered on the doorstep, breathing deeply. Inside, the air felt different now. No longer the warm scent of home, but something artificial, perfumed, empty. I walked slowly, not looking back. I ran my hand along the wall, the railing, the window frame. Every corner returned memories like tiny blades. The laughter of my daughter as a child, Lena's voice calling us to dinner, the echo of a life that was gone. Miller's voice broke through, trembling with anger. "This is an outrage. You can't do this to me." I turned to him for the first time, meeting his eyes directly. "I'm not doing anything to you, son. I'm giving you back the same lesson you gave me, to know what it feels like to end up on the street." He tried to step toward me, But Anthony blocked his path. The officer warned him that any aggression would be reported. My daughter cried silently. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but I couldn't, not yet. She had to understand. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the whisper of leaves outside. Then, in a steady voice, the officer announced, as of today, this property is once again under the possession of Mr. Hayes. For an instant, everything stopped. Time itself held its breath. Miller stepped back, white as the walls. My daughter covered her mouth with her hand, and I finally took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I felt air truly fill my lungs. I'm not trying to humiliate you, I told her quietly. I only want you to understand what respect means. I stepped into the garden and looked at Lena's tree. The wind whispered through its branches, like an invisible applause. Anthony came beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Marvin. No, I replied softly. They understood. The silence after the impact was overwhelming. No one spoke for several seconds. Only the sound of the wind filtered through the shutters, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My daughter's face was covered in tears, while Miller stood there, jaw tight, trying to maintain composure. I stood in the middle of the living room, the same place where once we celebrated birthdays, where my daughter took her first steps, where I had promised to protect her from the world. But now, I was the one watching her from the other side. The officer's voice cut through the quiet, firm and impersonal. You have 72 hours to vacate the property. Any belongings left after that time will be inventoried and secured under judicial order. Miller didn't protest at first, but then his voice cracked. This can't be legal, he shouted, turning toward Anthony. This is abuse. Anthony didn't flinch. Everything here is legal, signatures, records, witnesses. You used property that wasn't yours, falsified documents, and betrayed your family's trust. If you insist, you can explain that to the judge. Miller stepped back, pale, defeated. For the first time, I saw him small, fragile. No longer the man who screamed old useless man while trampling my photos. Now he looked like a frightened child trapped in a man's body. My daughter fell to her knees, her face streaked with tears. Dad, please don't do this. Don't leave us homeless. Her voice tore through me. I didn't answer right away. A knot rose in my throat. On the street, I said finally, my voice steady but quiet. Those were the words you told me, remember? Go die on the street, old man. She broke down, sobbing harder. I didn't know what I was doing. He manipulated me. Dad, I was confused. No, I interrupted calmly. You were comfortable. There's a big difference. Anthony and the officer began reviewing the final paperwork, signing documents, stamping seals, making sure everything was in order. I watched them move, but my mind was far away, wandering through memories. I remembered her small hands clutching mine when she was little, saying, I love you, Daddy. The nights she waited up for me after work. The time she climbed on my shoulders and said she wanted to see the world from where I did. And I thought, when does love turn into forgetfulness? She kept crying. Please, Dad, don't take this away. This is our life. I knelt slowly until my eyes were level with hers. I'm not taking anything away, daughter. I'm returning a lesson you forgot. Life always comes full circle, and when you disrespect someone, time itself reminds you. Her husband glared at me with fury barely contained. We'll rise from this, old man. You'll regret it. Anthony stepped forward sharply. Careful with your words. Unlike you, Mr. Hayes doesn't threaten, he acts. Miller stayed silent then, jaw tight, eyes hollow. He grabbed his coat, glanced around the room like a trapped animal, and stormed out, slamming the door. My daughter remained on her knees. I helped her up gently. For a moment, our eyes met, and in hers, I saw the child she once was, the little girl I picked up from school, the one who slept holding her teddy bear. I don't hate you, daughter, I said, my voice breaking. But I had to do this. She nodded slowly, as if finally understanding. The officer closed his folder. All set, Mr. Hayes. Anthony looked at me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. It's done, Marvin. I nodded in silence. When we stepped outside, the sky was gray. A light drizzle began to fall. I stopped for a moment in front of the gate, and watched as my daughter closed the door behind us. I knew the time she'd have there was short, but I also knew she needed it to learn. As we walked toward the car, Anthony glanced sideways at me. "Are you satisfied?" I took a few seconds before answering. I don't know if satisfied is the word, but I'm at peace. We got into the car. As it pulled away, I looked one last time at the garden. Lena's tree stood there, strong, steadfast, shining under the rain. Its branches swayed as if waving goodbye. Lena used to say trees could listen, that they carried the voices of the past. Maybe that tree knew that, at last, justice had bloomed. When we arrived back at the office, Anthony hugged me. "Rest, old friend. You've closed a chapter." I smiled, but my eyes filled with tears, because yes, I had closed a chapter. Yet when a man loses his daughter, even when justice stands on his side, the soul doesn't celebrate. It simply breathes. That night in my room, I opened the envelope with the letter I had written for her. I didn't deliver it, not yet. I put it back, adding a single new line at the end. "Maybe someday, when you understand what you did, this letter will bring back the memory of the love you lost. Until then, I'll watch over you in silence." I turned off the light, sat by the window, and listened to the rain. It was the same rain that fell the night they threw me out, but this time, it didn't hurt. It felt different. This time, the rain wasn't washing away the pain. It was forgiving it. Days passed after the court order, and a strange quiet settled over my life. The storm that had raged inside me for months was finally still. I would wake early, drink coffee by the window of Anthony's house, and watch the city stir awake. But peace, I learned, isn't silence. It's the slow rebuilding of what was broken inside. Anthony handled the rest of the paperwork, the transfer of possession, the legal cleanup. I stayed mostly alone, writing in my notebook, reflecting on what had happened. 3 days later, the house was officially mine again. The officer confirmed it. My daughter and her husband had vacated it. They left some furniture behind, and a few boxes of memories that didn't belong to them. The house stood empty now, waiting, just like I had waited. When Anthony handed me the keys, I didn't take them right away. I stared at them, small, shining, heavy with years. They were never really gone, I said softly. He smiled. "Then take them back where they belong." That afternoon, I returned to the house. Anthony offered to come, but I declined. "Some roads need to be walked alone," I told him. The taxi left me in front of the same gate where I had once fallen, bleeding, humiliated, broken. But now, the old man who had lain there no longer existed. I stood taller, my step steady. I put the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for my hand. Inside, the silence was immense. Every sound echoed through the empty rooms. The walls were bare, stripped of paintings and laughter, but I could still feel the pulse of the home I had built. Dust floated in the sunlight, like tiny ghosts of memories. I walked slowly, touching each wall, each corner. My reflection in the window looked like that of a stranger, and yet not. In the living room, I stopped. There, beneath a thin layer of dust, was the faint outline on the wall where Lena's portrait had hung. I ran my fingers along the mark, and my eyes filled with tears. "We're home again, love," I whispered. The house answered with silence, but I could feel her presence in it, soft and warm, like the scent of her old perfume. I opened every window to let the air in. The breeze rushed through, carrying away the weight of everything that had happened. I could almost hear the laughter of my daughter as a little girl, the clatter of dishes, the radio playing while Lena sang in the kitchen. For a few moments, the past returned, alive and whole. Then, like all ghosts, it faded again. I went to the garden. The grass was overgrown, the soil dry, but the old tree still stood, strong as ever. I approached it slowly, placing a hand against the trunk. The bark was rough beneath my fingers, but alive. "You never gave up either," I said. "You waited for me." There was an old wooden bench beside the tree, the one Lena and I used to sit on in the evenings. It was cracked and worn, but still there. I sat, breathing deeply. The wind moved the leaves, whispering softly. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in years, felt completely at home. Later that night, I cleaned the house alone. I swept the floors, washed the windows, and opened the drawers my daughter had left behind. Most were empty, but in one I found something that made my breath catch, a small photo frame. Inside it was a picture of me holding her as a baby. The glass was cracked, but the image intact. I sat on the floor, the photo trembling in my hands. That was before everything went wrong. Before life twisted the lines of love into distance and pride. I kept the photo on the table, lit a candle, and wrote in my notebook, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering without letting it destroy you." The next morning, Anthony came by with breakfast. "You look better," he said, setting down a bag of food. "How is it going back?" I smiled faintly, like meeting a part of myself I thought was dead. He nodded, understanding without words. "You know," he said after a pause, "she might come back one day. Your daughter." I sighed. "Maybe. But I'm not sure she'll find the same father she left behind." "No," Anthony said softly. "She'll find the one she needed all along." After he left, I stayed sitting by the window, looking at the tree. The light danced through the branches, and I felt something shift inside me. I realized that while justice had given me back my home, forgiveness was the only thing that could give me back my peace. That afternoon, I took a small box and walked to the backyard. Inside were the things that had survived: Lena's wedding ring, a lock of her hair I'd kept since she passed, a few dried petals from her favorite rosebush. I dug a small hole beneath the tree and placed the box inside. "For you, my love," I whispered, "so you'll always be here, in the roots of what we built." I covered it with soil and sat watching until the sun began to set. The following days brought a strange rhythm, quiet, almost sacred. I started fixing things again. The door that squeaked, the leaking faucet, the cracks in the walls. Each repair felt like stitching my life back together. The neighbors began to notice. Some would wave, surprised to see me again. Others pretended not to, out of guilt for never having asked where I'd gone. I didn't hold it against them. People fear other people's pain. One evening, as I was repainting the front fence, I saw a familiar silhouette across the street. My daughter. She stood there for a moment, hesitant, holding something in her hands. Our eyes met. She took a small step forward, then stopped. "You came back," she said softly. "Yes," I answered, keeping my tone gentle. "I came home." She looked down, then approached slowly, like someone crossing a fragile bridge. When she reached the gate, she hesitated again. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." "If I didn't, I wouldn't have opened the gate," I replied. She smiled faintly, a sad, tired smile. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She held out an envelope. I wanted to return this. I took it and recognized it immediately. It was the letter I'd written for her, the one I had left sealed in my drawer before she left. My heart skipped a beat. "You read it?" She nodded. "Every word. I found it when we were packing." "It broke me, Dad." I didn't answer. The silence between us carried more than words ever could. "You were right," she continued, tears running down her face. I was comfortable, not blind. I let him control me because I didn't want to lose what I thought was stability. But I lost something greater, you. And now, nothing feels like home anymore. I swallowed hard. Home isn't a place, daughter. It's the people we keep alive in our hearts. She sobbed quietly. "Can I come in?" For a moment I hesitated. Then I opened the gate. "Come," I said softly. "But this time, you enter as my daughter, not as a stranger." She stepped inside, and her eyes filled with tears as she looked around. The walls were bare, but the house had warmth again. "It smells like Mom," she whispered. "She never left," I said. "She was just waiting for us to find our way back." We sat on the bench beneath the tree. She told me everything. The manipulation, the fear, the guilt, how her husband had fled, how she had realized too late what kind of man he was. I listened in silence, not as a judge, but as a father. When she finished, she leaned her head on my shoulder, like she used to as a child. "Can you forgive me?" she whispered. I closed my eyes. I already did, long before you asked. The wind stirred the branches above us. The tree rustled softly, like applause. We stayed there until dusk, two souls broken by time, but mending in silence. Before she left that night, I hugged her tightly. "You'll always have a home here," I told her. But remember, respect keeps love alive." She nodded, crying softly. I'll never forget again. After she left, I returned to the bench and looked up at the stars appearing through the branches. I smiled faintly. For the first time since Lena's death, I didn't feel alone. Justice had given me back my house. Forgiveness had given me back my family. And peace, at last, had come home too. The following morning, sunlight poured through the open windows, bathing the house in gold. I hadn't seen it that bright in years. It no longer felt empty. It breathed again, as if it had waited for this light to return. I stood in the living room, coffee in hand, looking around at the bare walls and the dust still lingering in corners. Somehow, even in its silence, the house felt alive. I spent that day cleaning and rearranging. I took down what my daughter had left, her expensive, hollow decorations, and replaced them with simple things. The photo of Lena and me on our wedding day, the ceramic vase we bought at the market, and the old clock that had stopped ticking long ago but still belonged here. Every object was a heartbeat from the past, and together they began to sing again. By afternoon, my daughter returned. She came alone, with her hair tied back, wearing the same kind of clothes she used to wear before wealth dulled her spirit. She looked younger, freer, though the sadness in her eyes hadn't yet faded. She carried a small box. "These are yours," she said, setting it on the table. Inside were the photos, the shirts, the broken memories that had once been thrown onto the street. "I kept them," she whispered. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. I ran my hand over the photos, me, her, and Lena. A lifetime in pieces, now returned. I smiled faintly. "You saved more than objects, daughter. You saved a part of us." We spent the afternoon talking. She told me she had left her husband for good, that she was staying at a friend's place for now and wanted to start fresh. I listened quietly. She spoke of regret, of nights spent awake haunted by guilt, of how she'd replayed the moments she turned her back on me over and over. "Every time it rains," she said, "I see you outside the house. I can't forget." I touched her hand. "Then don't forget. Memory is a wound that teaches. Let it stay, so you never hurt someone like that again." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. We didn't talk about punishment or revenge anymore. Those words had lost meaning. What remained between us was truth, naked and raw, but healing. Later that evening, we went to the garden. The sky was a violet hue, and the air smelled of wet soil. The tree, Lena's tree, stood proud, its branches swaying gently. I told my daughter how I had buried the box with Lena's keepsakes beneath it. She knelt beside the trunk and placed a single white flower there. "I wish she could see us now," she murmured. "She can," I said, looking at the sky. She always could. We sat on the old bench together, the wood creaking beneath our weight. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like music you could almost hear. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. It takes the sharpness out of it, leaving behind a kind of gentle ache that reminds you you're still human. When night fell, she left with a quiet promise to return the next day. "We'll fix this place together," she said with a small smile. "It deserves life again." After she left, I stood under the tree, looking at the stars through its branches. The night air was cool, and the scent of jasmine drifted from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, Lena." She came back. I thought I could almost hear her laugh, carried by the wind, a soft, familiar sound that once filled our home. The days that followed were simple, almost sacred. My daughter came every morning, bringing groceries or fresh paint, and we worked side by side, mending what time had worn down. She hummed softly while she worked, the same melody Lena used to sing when she cooked. Sometimes I'd stop just to listen. It was like hearing an echo of my wife's spirit, alive again in our daughter's voice. Neighbors began to visit. At first, they came shyly, pretending they just happened to pass by. Some brought food, others flowers. They all said the same thing in different ways. "We're glad you're back, Marvin." I didn't hold grudges. I knew silence had protected them when they saw injustice. Fear has a way of making people blind. I accepted their words with a smile. One afternoon, Anthony came by. He looked different, relaxed, almost lighter. "So this is what victory looks like," he said, gazing around. "No," I replied with a smile. "This is what peace looks like." He laughed softly. "You're a better man than most, Marvin. Many would have used the law to destroy them. You used it to heal." "The law gave me back the house," I said. "But forgiveness gave me back myself." Anthony stayed for dinner. My daughter cooked her mother's old stew recipe, and we ate at the table where so many arguments and celebrations had once taken place. At one point, Anthony raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, "and to the courage to take them." "To second chances," I echoed, my daughter joining softly. That night, after they left, I sat once more by the window with my notebook. I wrote the final page of my story, though I didn't plan for anyone to read it. I thought I had lost everything, I wrote, but I was wrong. You only lose what you stop believing in. Dignity, love, family, they can be buried, but not destroyed. The world tried to take everything from me, but it couldn't take the will to stand again. In the end, justice wasn't the papers or the courts. It was the moment my daughter knocked on my door and called me Dad again. When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf beside Lena's photo. Her eyes seemed to watch me still, gentle, proud, eternal. Weeks turned into months. The house transformed slowly, but beautifully. My daughter planted new flowers around the garden. The neighbors came often. Laughter returned to the walls. The old bench beneath the tree became our favorite spot. We'd sit there every evening, watching the sunset, speaking less and feeling more. Sometimes she'd hold my hand like she did when she was little, and I'd realize how fragile and precious life truly is. One evening, as the sky turned crimson, she said quietly, "You know, I used to think forgiveness was weakness, that if you forgave someone, you gave away your power. And now?" I asked. "Now I know it's the only way to be free." I smiled, proud. "Then you've learned the hardest lesson life can teach." After she went home that night, I stayed in the garden until the stars appeared. The world felt calm, complete. I looked at the tree, its leaves shimmering in the starlight, and I felt Lena everywhere, in the air, in the soil, in my heart. Time passed gently after that. My daughter visited every week. Anthony called often, sometimes stopping by with a bottle of wine and stories of new cases. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, one built not on wealth or power, but on gratitude. One autumn evening, I sat alone by the window. The leaves had turned gold, and the air carried that bittersweet scent of endings. I felt tired but peaceful. I knew my journey was nearly done, not in sorrow, but in fulfillment. I had seen the full circle of pain, loss, justice, and forgiveness. I had watched the world break and rebuild around me. Before going to bed, I wrote one final note in my notebook. If someone reads these pages one day, let them know. Life can take everything from you except the chance to begin again. As long as there's breath, there's time to forgive, to rise, and to love once more. I placed the notebook beneath Lena's photo and whispered, "I'll see you soon, love." The wind moved through the open window, rustling the curtains softly. The house seemed to sigh, a content, living thing at peace with itself. When my daughter came the next morning, the sun was bright, and the air smelled of rain and earth. She found me sitting in the chair by the window, my hands resting calmly on my lap, a faint smile frozen on my face. I had gone quietly, without struggle, with the dawn light warming the walls I had built so long ago. She cried, of course, but not with despair. She said later it felt as though the house had just gone silent for a moment to listen to the peace that filled it. Anthony helped her arrange everything. They buried my ashes under the tree beside Lena's keepsake box. The inscription on the small stone simply read, "Marvin Hayes, builder, father, forgiver. Home is where the soul rests." And under that old tree, where roots twined with memory, my story finally ended, not in loss, but in peace. Because in the end, everything I had built with love had come home again.